Hello and welcome to the next video in the Ultimate Notion tutorial series. Today it's all about Notion formulas. There's no reason to be scared. Notion formulas are not a trip back to math in 5th grade. It's actually a super powerful way to upgrade your Notion workspace. But it can be a bit intimidating to get started. So I put together this tutorial to show you everything you need to know about formulas in Notion. There are timestamps in the description, and after this I promise you'll be a real master when it comes to formulas. Let's jump right in. Let's learn everything you ever need to know about formulas in Notion. We're going to first look at some basics, and after that we're going to cover the 4 broad categories of formulas: calculations, date manipulation, string manipulation, and lastly logic. And don't worry if you don't know yet what any of these means. By the end of it, it will become very self-explanatory and you'll have no problem using formulas in Notion. First things first, let's get this actually full width so we have a bit more space to work with. And then in Formula Basics, we are going to just create a database that we can use throughout this tutorial. This will be our formulas, and we can just add a few entries. Let's add Black Widow, let's add Spider-Man, and let's add the Hulk. And then just for showcasing, let's add also a number property quickly. Oops, and let's just do 1, 2, 3. Perfect. So of course, in order to use a formula in Notion, we need to create a formula property. So we click on the plus icon, we pick the formula from here, and if you don't know everything about databases yet, I'll leave a link in the video description for my tutorial on those. But yeah, now we have a formula property, and as you can see, we just have one option. We can edit the formula. If we click on there, the formula editor opens, and it has 3 sections. It has first the section for us to type our formula. Then on the left side, you see all the things that you could use in your formula. And it starts with the properties in your database. You see these two reflect our 2 properties. And if you would add more properties, they would all show up here first. And then we have a range of first variables, constants, and then operators and other formulas that we can use in our formula. And then on the right side, you see an explanation of whatever it is that you are looking at. So for example, if I look at the constant e, we see base of the natural logarithm, and we see what it would equal to. And if we go lower to like the operators, for example, if, it will explain you the syntax and it will give you an example of how to build it. So if you ever use something and you're not entirely sure how it works, once you've gone through this tutorial and know the basics of it, you'll be able to put everything together just from the explanations here. But let's just see how this would work. If I now click on my name property, you see the property is always called with like prop, then the brackets, and then the name of the property in quotation marks. So you see if I were to remove these now, it doesn't work anymore, and you see that now I can't press on done. So whenever you have a wrong formula, Notion won't let you finish it. And you see also at the bottom in red the reason for that error. And the formula editor isn't the smoothest, so sometimes it can be very confusing what it says down there. In this case, it's fairly simple. It says invalid property reference name. So we did not reference it correctly. We need to add the quotation marks back, and now it would work. Now, you could, of course, instead of like clicking here, this time we just clicked here and it put it in. Instead of doing this, you could obviously, of course, type it as well. So you could type prop, and then you could type name, and then close the brackets, and it also shows up. One thing that's a bit risky here, though, is if you type it for whatever reason wrong, right? If I say names, that property doesn't exist. So now it tells me property not found names. And one more thing, this is case sensitive. So in case I have name, you also small, you also see that it won't find anything. So it's really important that when you call your properties from the table or the database, that you make sure that you type the name correctly, or you just pick it from the menu here anyway. Okay, so this is how we can call a property, and then if we do that, it simply shows up. As you can see, click on done, and now the formula just repeats what I have here. So if I say Black Widow is cool, you see that the formula does this here too. So that's pretty simple. 2 more things that you need to know about the formula basics before we move on to the specific ones is that first, you can only call the property from the same row. remember from the database video, this is a database, not a spreadsheet. So if this was Excel, you could simply type in here, okay, get the value from, let's put probably be A, like A3, but that's not possible in Notion. In Notion, we can only call the corresponding properties of each row. So there's a workaround to get like information from other cells into this one, but in general, you will be limited to getting only the things from the same row. And then the second thing to know is the result of a formula. In Notion databases and in formulas, there are basically 4 types of data. There are booleans, string, number, and dates. And they sound complicated, but they're actually fairly simple. A boolean is a checkbox. It's true or false. So if we go for the checkbox property, you see it here. That one is always either true or false. It has only one of 2 states. And a Notion formula can return a boolean if you ask it whether something is true. We're going to cover it in a second, but we could, for example, ask it, okay, does the name equal to Spider-Man? And then you see that now the result of the formula changed to boolean because the question was a yes or no question. Is it equal? And then it will return either not equal, so false, or equal, true. You can also get that through the constants. So you see there's a true and false property. So if I just like have true in there, then all of them will be true. And also if I put in false, all of them would be false. So that's the first data type. It's basically yes or no. And some formulas, and you can always see what sort of data type is returned by a formula or by an entry by the symbol in front of it. You see the name has these lines, that's a string. So a string is nothing else than a sequence of characters. It could be numbers, it could be letters, it doesn't matter. If it's a string, it will just like put the characters in there and won't try to recognize any numbers or sort of operations. If it's a number, then it will interpret it as something that it can do math on. So here with the number one, we could do a calculation. You also always see in Notion, by the way, whether it's a number or a string, whether it's aligned to the right or aligned to the left. So you see if I would turn now Black Widow to 1, and now I said here, okay, please return the property name, you see that everything is left aligned, even the number, because in this case, Notion doesn't recognize this as a number, it recognizes it as a string. And we'll talk about this a bit later when we add string manipulations of why that's important. Okay, so we have booleans, strings, numbers, and then last formula type, data type that we have are dates. So the dates are a bit special, right? They get returned with a lot of additional information. So if we have one of these in our database, you see now this is the 4th symbol, the date. And again, you can go through all of them and you see most of the operators here at the beginning, they all return numbers. Then there are a few ones that return true or false. Then there are a bunch of them that return strings and so on and so on. And this is particularly important because sometimes you need to put a specific data type into a formula. Again, let's just quickly look at something. If you look at the add property operator, you see we add 2 numbers and return their sum, or we concatenate 2 strings. So either if we put 2 numbers in there, it will add them like a normal math operation. But if we put 2 pieces of text together, it will just combine the text. Let's quickly look at this. So we have here our name. Let's get another text property, sample text, and let's say, okay, is cool, is quick, is strong. And now we go back here to Black Widow, and then we also get a second number property, and here we do like 2, 3, 4. So if our formula, let's move them around. So here we have the 2 numbers, here we have the 2 texts. If our formula now says, okay, add, and now we see, okay, to add something, we can either just write the plus thing in between it, or we can type add, open the parentheses, and then put the 2 number properties or the 2 text properties in there. So let's do it like this first. We say add, and then please add together the name, and then comma, and the sample text. And then we need to close the brackets. We also see it here. It expected a parentheses here. Oops. And now we see
okay, it added both things together. And because we don't have a space anywhere, it actually puts them directly together. So let's add spaces here. And now you see it just added these two strings together. Now, if we instead add two numbers, and in this case, let's do it the other way. So we have our number, then we type the plus, and then we type again a number. Oops, that was twice the number. And we click on done. You see now it sums them up. So we actually do the math operation. And for this now, it's so important that you have always the right data type, because if I change Black Widow now to 1, Spider-Man to 2, and Hulk to 3, and we would try to do, okay, please add the name plus our sample number, it will tell you, wait, this is a mismatch. It's not the same type of data. Even though if you look at it, it seems that this is a number and this is a number. But in this case, Notion reads this as a string, so you can't actually do the operation. Moving on from formula basics to calculations. Now, calculations will be a fairly short chapter, but important nonetheless. Let's imagine for a second that we're an event planner with our 3 events and a number of invitations, replies, and yes or no answers. Now, if we want to run analytics on them, we probably want to first ask ourselves, okay, how many replies are we still waiting on? And that formula, of course, is super simple. We go to the formula property, we say waiting on, and our formula will simply be to subtract one from the other. And we can simply type this as a normal math operation with our minus in between. Okay, that's already great, but maybe we also want the percentage of our replies. So for that, we would create a separate formula property. Again, go to formulas and say, okay, percent answered. And in this case, our formula would be the number of replies divided by the number of invitations. And as you can see, by default, Notion returns numbers always like this, but we can simply click on number format or on this 1, 2, 3 that appears if we hover over it to change it to percent. Awesome. And since the last update, we can also show number or formula properties as progress bars or progress rings, which is also a neat little addition. One thing that we can't do, unfortunately, is to tell Notion to only show a maximum of like 2 numbers behind the comma or like the dot. So this is a bit annoying with these very weird long percentages. For that, we would need to round it. So let's look how that will be done. We again create a new property. We go to our formula and we say rounded. And then if we type just in round, we see there's a function for that. And if we read through it, it returns the value of a number rounded to the nearest integer. So if it's 4.4, 4, 4.55. Awesome. Only problem with percentages is if we get this one, you will see that it returns either 0 or 1 because those are the nearest integers. So that's not the way to go if you want to get rounded percentages. Instead, what you would need to do is you would need to take your percent answered. You would need to multiply it times 100 to turn all these percentages into full integers and then round that. So I'm just going to type now round, open parentheses and close them at the back. And now you can see we have our rounded number. Although now that rounded number is without the percentage. So if you want to get also the percentage back, we can't do it like this, because if we now turn this to percent, right, it would be 3000%. That's a bit much. So instead what we need to do is we need to do a little trick and already look at something that we will do later in string manipulations. We can simply add a percentage manually behind this. And to do so, let's create another formula property. Sorry, I always confuse these two. Formula and then add percentage. In this case, what we want to do is we want to combine the rounded value with a percent. We can't just type plus percent, unfortunately, because first it would recognize a percentage as an operator. As you see, it's like orange, like the plus. So the first thing we would need to do is to tell it, okay, actually the percentage should not be regarded as an operator, it should be regarded as a symbol. So to do that, we put it inside quotation marks. But it still doesn't work because we have a property mismatch, because rounded is not text, it's a number. Remember, this is now a string because it's within quotation marks, and this is still a number. So we would need to turn our number into a string first. And we can do that fairly simple by typing format. If we get format, we will see that it turns any argument into a string. So a number 42 will simply be turned into the string 42. That's exactly what we want. So we open the parentheses, we get our rounded value, and let's just close it for now. And as you can see, now we have the left aligned numbers, which means it's a string. And now all we need to do is we need to type plus and get our percent icon. And now we have 30%, 80%, 43%, just like here, but rounded. Now, you can't use this now to do further calculations, this property, right? Because this is now a string, so you would first need to turn it back into a number. But if you just want to display the rounded percentage value, this would be the way to go. Okay, I think that's all. I think we actually don't need to look at the yes or no here. Maybe actually one last thing that we can show with that. Let's say is the majority yes? And for that, we can use the smaller or bigger operators. So we can say, is the yes property bigger than the no property? And as you can see, this again returns a boolean, so a checkbox, a yes or no field, because something is either bigger or smaller than the other thing. And that you can do with these operators. So moving on from calculations to date manipulations. This one is a really fun one. You can do so many things with it in Notion. So let's get started. And first, take a quick look at the things that we can actually do with dates in general. So we obviously have the date property in Notion to just enter date. But then we have a few specific things that we can do through formulas. So let's quickly explore that. So if we get a formula property and we scroll down the number of operators to the ones that start showing us that they have something with the date, we see first start and end. They're fairly simple. They simply return the start or end of a date range. So if you put into your date property a whole range, not just a single date, right? You can always toggle on end date, and then you have start to end date. And with the formula for start or end, you can then obviously return the first or the last date in that sequence. Now, a bit more important, with the timestamp now, you get the current time. So if I click into now, I need to close the parentheses, we see that we get the current date, September 7th, date of the recording, 10/17. Yes. So that's how you get the current time in Notion. Now, you can always have dates shown like this in Notion, or you can also show them as a timestamp. And a timestamp is a series of numbers that basically just represents the number of milliseconds that have passed since January 1st, 1917, and turns a date into this really big number. So if you say, okay, give me a timestamp off, and now I have two options to enter an argument here. I can either say, okay, please give me the date that I had here before, so that was formula 2, right, and close it. That returns a timestamp. Or instead of having this, because remember this was now, I could also just type now in here again. And that would do exactly the same. That's also maybe something in general to remember about formulas that I didn't say in the beginning for basics. The way you can enter arguments into them, so things that are supposed to happen with them, is always either by just like feeding in a different property, right, or typing it directly into here. So same of course for the time, the number calculations, right? Instead of saying like property A minus property B, you could also just say like please give me 5 minus 4, right? That works just as well. But back to dates. So we have our now timestamp, which returns the current time. And then the time we have now, which returns the current date, and we have timestamp, which returns a number based on the date. And then you have the corresponding formula from timestamp that will turn a timestamp back into the date. So let's quickly look at it. So we get the current timestamp, right, closing it. And then we add another formula property and we turn it back into our date from timestamp. And let's take here formula 3 from our properties. By the way, you can also just start typing things, and then it will start sorting the sidebar for you if you ever search for something, and then close it, and we can see, okay, it's again the same date. Now, there are a few use cases for a timestamp. One of them would be to get random numbers into Notion. I'll leave a link in the description for you where you can find out more about that method. But for now, we will mostly working with the date itself, not with the timestamp. So let's quickly hide them again. That was just so that you know what's possible. Great. So what are sort of use cases that you could actually do with these dates? Well, the first thing we could do is we could check whether our invitation, whether we still have time to send an invitation or whether this is overdue. Could be the same for task, right? And due date, is that due date still good or is it overdue? And we can simply do that through a formula, and a very basic one indeed. So let's create one. Let's call this overdue. And all we need to do is we need to check whether our current date is bigger than our due date, or in this case, send the invitation on. And what this will do is it will return a checkbox, and that checkbox we could then use to, for example, create a view somewhere else in our workspace and filter it to show only the events for which there are overdue invitations to be sent out. So we see at a glance, okay, we still need to send something out here. Okay, so let's look for it's formula 2, right? That's the current date. And let's say this should be, if this is bigger than the send invitation on, then we have a problem. So we do this, and let me first quickly rename this maybe to now. And as you can see, if you rename a property and you reference it in a formula, it will automatically update it so you don't mess everything up. Okay, so as you can see, we have now 2 tick checkboxes. We have one tick checkbox for the one where we should send the invitation on August 29th. That's correct. We don't have a tick for September 14th. That's also correct. But then there's like a little weird one, and that's this one, because it is still September 7th, right? So this should not be overdue. But the problem here is that if you take a normal date in Notion, it will always take midnight if you don't put in a time. And I can prove that to you by simply turning this into a timestamp and then turning it back into a date, because then it will show the time as well. So let's just do the quick proof and say, okay, we have here our send invitation on, right? And we want to turn this into a timestamp. So I type timestamp and put the thing into parentheses. Now we have it as a timestamp. And now I turn it back into the date again. And I just do this by nesting all these statements, right? You need to read them from the inside out. So now we have the last thing in that argument would then be to say, okay, please from timestamp, take all of this and turn it back into a date. And again, these like nested statements can be a bit confusing, but the easiest is to like look for the one in the middle. Okay, so we start with send invitation on, we turn it into a timestamp, and then we get the date from this timestamp. And as you can see, the result is September 7th, 12 a.m., so midnight. And midnight, that was obviously 10 hours ago, so this is technically correct. This is overdue indeed. But it's probably not what you want to have in your Notion workspace. You don't want to probably show dates that are due today as overdue. So in order to fix this, we need to change now from actually today to tomorrow, because then at like the second September 7th turns over to September 8th, it will show this correctly. So how can we change the date on something? Well, that's a great next exercise. So let's add a formula one and say, okay, get add days to date, for example. And we do this with an operator that was also hidden down below here, and that's called dateAdd. So we can simply add things to date. We can specify the unit later as we want. So we see this is the syntax. We have our dateAdd, then we have the date to which we want to add something, then how much we want to add, and then a text to define what is it that we are adding, right? Are we adding years, quarters, months, weeks, days, minutes, and so on and so on. Now, of course, if Notion would not have this dateAdd one, you could do it just as well by getting the timestamp and then calculating how many milliseconds, right, you need to add to the timestamp and then turning it back. But that's fairly complicated, so we're really glad that Notion has this dateAdd property. So let's start again with now. I like to start from this and then build a formula around so that you can always see live how it changes. So now September 7th. Now we do date add. And you actually need to capitalize this, otherwise Notion will be confused. So we have now, and now we can check again, okay, after the date we need to put a comma and then we need to put a number. So let's put the number 1. And then we see again, okay, after the number we need to put another comma and then we need to put text in quotation marks, whatever we want to add to it. So let's just check this out with years actually. And as you can see, now we have 2023. And I can go now back in here and say, add 10 years, 2032, and so on and so on. Perfect. So that formula works. And now we simply go back to days, and now we add 1 day to it. So now our timestamp for now is instead of having the now timestamp with September 29th and September 8th, we have the next date, right? Awesome. So with this date add one, we can go back to here and add this accordingly. So we can go in here and whoops, for the overdue one, actually we don't need to add it to now, of course, because that would just mean that now gets pushed 1 to the future. What we probably want to do is we want to add +1 to our send the invitation date on, so that one where we don't have the exact time is correct. So we go in here and we say, okay, this should be bigger than, and then we say date add this, add 1 day to it, and make it days, and close it, close this, and now you can see now the wrong overdue is gone. But if I put this now to yesterday, September 6th, it shows correctly. Awesome. So this is how you can use create like first a formula to check whether something is overdue, and then use the add date to manipulate this. And you can, of course, there's also like date subtract, right? As you can see down here, date subtract does the opposite, it subtracts it, but instead you could also just put a minus in here and it does just the same. And you can just play around with the operators if you wanted to, so we could say also, okay, please add to this here 30 minutes, right? And now it's in half an hour, and so on and so on. So with this, you can do pretty much anything. The next thing that we might want to do is to see, okay, which invitations need to be sent today. So for that, we again create a new formula and we ask send today. And at first glance, what we would do, right, is we would just say, okay, does now equal our send invitation on? One more thing also in Notion, if you try, we haven't done it yet, but if you try to check whether something is equal, you need to use 2 equal signs. And that's because there's a bunch of other operators that you can use with it. So you could say not equal, that would be exclamation mark, the equal sign, or you could say larger than or equal, and so on and so on. But for like equal, you need to use 2 equal signs. So let's check whether now is equal to our send invitation date. Oops. Not like this. And as you can see, none of them are equal. And that's even though one should be sent today, September 7th. Again though, this is because this date here, even though we don't see it, has a secret time attached to it, 12 midnight, and now it's not 12 midnight, it's nearly 11 a.m. So in order for this to work, you first need to turn both of them into the same format. And the easiest way to do that is through format date. So with format date, we can take a date and turn it into any traditional layout for a date. There are a bunch of versions. This is just the beginning. There are many, many more. But basically what you do, you pass in a date and then you tell it, okay, how do you want it to be returned? And Notion will do just that. It will, however, return it as a string. So it will no longer be a date that you can actually use to then, do the add date formula. So you would need to do that before you format it. But let's look at this first. So format date, and we take now, right? Oops, now. And now we need to say it, okay, tell them like, how do you want it to be formatted? So we need to put it again in quotation marks. And now there are like a lot of ways of how you can format it. You can either play around with it, or you can Google for the official Notion documentation, because there are a lot more like ways to do this than just these 4 that are shown here. For example, I could just put in year, close this, and it would just return the year. I could also just do 2 Ys, and that would just give the ending of the year. I could do 1 big M, that would give me the number for the month. I could do 2 M's, that would give me 2 numbers. 3 M's gives me the short name of the month, and 4 M's the full name. And like this is basically true for all the other ones as well. I think 1 M, I don't know what actually returns. But for days, same, like, so for a large day, the small day is probably the day of the week, right? Yeah, so Wednesday is the 3rd day, and the large day is the actual date day. So as you can see, there are like a lot of things that you can return to it. So it's the 250th day of the year, by the way. Either way, there are a lot of things that you can pass in here, and it's best to either play around or look at the official documentation to figure out, okay, what exactly do I need to put in? But for the most part, it's fairly self-explanatory. You use the D to do anything with the day, M for month, and the Y for the year. So we could just say, okay, please return day, month, and then the year to get this sort of day. And now we could simply check whether this is equal to, and then we again say format date to format also the send invitation on in the same way. Format date, send invitation on, and then again do dd, y, close it. And now, as you can see, it works properly, because now we've converted it in the same look, and we don't have the difference in hours here anymore. And now today is actually correctly ticked as today. Awesome. That's already most of the things that we can do with dates, but a few more things remain. One of these things is DateBetween. And DateBetween is another super helpful one. So let's just call this DateBetween. That will automatically give you the time between 2 dates. And again, you can then pick in what sort of format you want it to have. So DateBetween, we can see, okay, so we put in 1 date, and we put in the 2nd date, and then we return the different, like in what type do we want to have the difference. So if we just say, okay, please give me our current date. So please give me the send invitation date, and give me our current date. So now, and then give me how many days are in between there. Oops. We can see now, okay, so this one was 9 days ago. We should have sent the invitation 9 days ago. This is today, so it's 0, perfect. And September 14th, that one we will need to have to send in 6 days. And that again is super useful. Well, first off, you could, instead of using this formula here, right, where we formatted like this, we could also just say, do the same thing by taking our DateBetween result, right, and ask it, okay, where is this 0? And that, of course, will also show us which of these dates is today. Then we don't need to do the other manipulation. But we can also use this now to create filters to say, okay, what is within the next 7 days or so. As you know, Notion's date filters, they are quite nice. You can have, let's just take, okay, send invitation on, right? And you can now say is within, and you can pick the past week, the past month, next week, next month, and so on and so on. So if it's like within a week or so, perfectly fine, you can just use this. But maybe you want to see all the invitations that need to be sent in the next 3 days. You can't do it like this, right? Because Notion doesn't offer you the way to filter for 3 days. But you can do it with this method, because now we can just add a second. Oops, let's remove that filter actually. So we see everything again. We could just add another formula and ask, okay, within 3 days, question mark. And we just say, okay, what we want to do is the date between. So date between, is that equal to, or is it, is it bigger or equal to 0? So is it not in the past, right? This will give all the ones that are in, oops, no, this was not the right way around. So date between needs to be don't know, it is correct, yeah. So this is lower, obviously this is in the past, so it's not ticked. These are ticked, perfect, bigger than nil. And then we need to pass in a second argument. That again would be part of the logic, but we actually already look at it here so that we can use it here. Because we need to now have a second one, right? We need to say, okay, it should be bigger than 0, so we only want to see the ones from now. And we want to see the ones that are not bigger than 3, or like not bigger than 4, so within the next 3 days. And we can do that using the AND operator. So I'm just going to remove this quickly and type AND. And you see with AND, you can put in 2 arguments, and only if both of them are true, does it return true. So we do AND, and now we just, again, nest our arguments. So we say, okay, it should be bigger than 0, and DateBetween should be smaller or equal to 3. And then we close it. And now it will only be checked if it's actually between 0 and 3, right? This one is checked, perfect. So let's like move this to next one, to tomorrow. Then it should turn into, oops, does it actually update here? Yes, so we have the 9, we have the 10th for this, and now we have 11 for 3 dates between, and it's still checked. And if we move it one more out further, it starts being unchecked. I think that error here is again because of the things that we added in here with some of the modifications. Either way, you see once it flips over to 4, this is no longer checked. And now we can simply, let's put this back to this here, and let's put it back to this here. So we have now 2 checked things, and we could simply add a filter. Please show me only the ones where within 3 days, we've called it, within 3 days is checked. And now you have a formula that shows you only the dates that are due within the next 3 days. Pretty cool. There's a lot of more things that you can do with dates, but this is it for the beginning. Now you know how to use date manipulation. First, you know how to get the current date. You know how to add days to something or to subtract from dates. You also know how to get the difference between dates and how to do some very basic logic checks on them. Awesome. Enough for dates about now. Let's look at strings. So we already know now, right, what the string property type is compared to a number. It's just a collection of characters. But that doesn't mean that we can't do run formulas on it. We just can't do math operations, right? We can't do a calculation on it, but we can very well do some other stuff with it. And before we look at that, just one last quick thing. We already learned how to turn a number into a string, right? Number to string. That was simply through the format operation. So if I put a 5 in here, right, I just turn in that. Also, one more thing while we're here. If I type something, if I type anything just as directly into the operations here, for example, format, Notion will interpret this as a command. So if you want to use actually something as a string, you need to always put it into quotation marks. So if I put it in quotation marks, it will interpret it as a string, and as you see, it just outputs that string. Same for numbers. If you put in a number, it will interpret it as a number, as indicated by the color pink. But if you put quotation marks around it, it will interpret it as a string and push it to the left here. So that's just a quick side note. If you want to input anything and it's supposed to be a string, always put in quotation marks. Otherwise, Notion will interpret it either as an operator or as a number. Cool. So we get a number by simply typing format, putting in the number and pressing done, and then it is actually a string. But we can also do the opposite and turn a string back into a number. And we do that by string to number, simply typing to number, and that will recognize a number from something. So if I put in now our number to string property here, we see it is again a number because it is aligned to the right. If you put in something where it can't recognize the number, so for example, cool, it's not, now it again tries to interpret it as a command, and it's obviously not a command, so need to put it in quotation marks. Into cool, that's obviously not a number, it can't read anything out of there. And if you put in cool 5, it still can't figure the number from this. So this, whatever you put in here needs to be just a number, otherwise this command fails. Okay, so what else can we do with strings? Of course, we can simply combine them, right? We already learned that we can do that simply by typing the combining strings, by simply typing plus. So we can do name plus text, and that's one way to do this. Then, of course, you need to pay attention that you have your spacings actually there. We could do it also here. We could just add like a quotation mark, a space, and another quotation mark, another plus, and now it would put this quotation mark interpreted as a string in between it. So that's one way to do this. Usually, I would recommend that you don't use just the plus thing, and instead use the command concat. Concat pretty much does the same as the plus icon, but it sometimes makes it a bit clearer that that's actually what you want to do. So as you can see, concat, you either write it with the plus icons or you write concat in the front, and then inside here you write all the arguments that you want to have. It just like combines strings. So this is super useful if you want to do any sort of display. So let's say, for example, we have a power level, right? So power level, or like the age. That's it. Let's do the age. I actually have no idea how old they are, so let's do probably like something like this, and he's, I guess, maybe 45, who knows. Let's put in some ages, and now if we have a different like a different view of this database somewhere else, right? We could say, oops, sorry. Let's quickly create a link database, copy the link, and oops, add it down below here. Zuck, link view of database, and let's do this as a gallery. Then you can remove the page content preview, just have this, and this is a really nice way to show data from your database. So we can just take a property, turn on DH. Cool. It's just a number though, right? Like there should be a nicer way to present this, and there is. So what we can do is we can use this combining strings method to have some cooler announcement here. So we can say, okay, let's create a formula, and this is like a display property, h, and let's get the concat one. We want to combine something, and we want to write, okay, maybe we want to use an emoji also. Maybe let's use fire emoji, and then say the hero's name. So first we need to get the name, then we get, and see, I put in a space here so that there's it's not like smushed together. So I want to get the name, and then we want to say is, and then we want the age. So I can't put the age in now because that is a number, so I need to type format. Then I get the age, and now I can continue, format the age, and then years old. Close it all, and now you get Black Widow is 35 years old, Spider-Man is 18 years old, and so on and so on. And we can go down here, and we can say properties, please show our display property, and that is much nicer than simply the number up here. It's also the basis to create super cool statistics in Notion if you want to learn more about this, and like a lot more in-depth method about these things, and yeah, how you can use this to create like full-on statistics for your Notion Workspace and analytics. Check out the video in the description. That is definitely worth a watch. For now, let's move on. So we now know how to use concat to combine our strings, possibly numbers, together for some cool announcements. One more thing that we can do with our string is we can simply count the length. If you ever need to, for whatever reason, you need to get the length of a string, you could simply say, okay, length, and then put in the name, and that will, oops, this part, not correct. Don't know why we have so many, oops, too many brackets. And now it simply counts how many symbols there are. So if I now go in here, oops, that's not what we wanted to do. If we go in here and add like a space, it's now 12, and so on and so on. So that can come in handy sometimes. a super, super powerful function in Notion is replace. So with replace, you can remove things from your text, and there are various things that you can remove. So there are actually two replace formulas. There's replace and there's replace all. Replace will just replace the first instance of something, whereas replace all will remove every instance of it. So for example, if, I don't know, is awesome and is pretty cool, let's do it like this. If we say, okay, in our replace formula, we want to replace is for whatever reason. So we say replace. And as you can see, the syntax for this one is you put in the thing where you want to replace something. Then you search for what is supposed to be replaced, and then what it's supposed to be replaced by. So in our case, we want to get the text property. And what we want to replace here is the word is. Again, we need to put it in quotation marks because we look for the string. And we want to replace this with nothing. And to do nothing, we just type two quotation marks and nothing in between. And then we close it. So now, as you can see, it removed the first is. And only that one because the second one is still here. So if we want to remove all instances of is, we just switch it to replace all. And there we go. Everything gone. Now, that alone can already be quite helpful if you need to manipulate something, but it becomes really, really powerful in combination with something called regular expressions. And regular expressions are fairly complicated. They are a way of indicating to your computer what sort of characters or symbols it should replace. And they can be a real pain to figure out how to write them, in particular if you have very little knowledge of computer science like I do. The best thing to do here is to first know that it's possible to write regular expressions in Notion, and that you can use regular expressions to do some pretty awesome extractions. For example, to remove every letter, right? So if we had now like here also a bunch of numbers, and here as well, because for whatever reason that's how the string is that we got out of here. We could use the regular expression to remove either all numbers or all text from here to make clean this up a bit. It could be, for example, quite cool if you have an address, right? So you could say maybe he, Black Widow, she lives on Avengers Avenue 27, right? And you want to now, and he lives on, I don't know, somewhere in school district 5, and he random island 8. So, and if we wanted to now split up address and house number, it could be quite useful to do that with a formula, and we can do that with a regular expression. And for that, we would need to pass in here the argument for a regular expression. And again, this is the part where I would recommend you to Google or use a resource that I link down below to turn natural language into a regular expression. You simply type in what you want to do and it will give you most of the time a fairly decent result. But let's try whether we can actually figure it out here for this example. So usually you need to put them into these brackets, and then you need to put in what it is that you're looking for. So I'm pretty sure for letters it should be A to Z. That should remove everything there, but as you can see already that didn't work. Does it work with this? Nope. Yep, that worked. Okay, so A, we need to put in quotation marks around everything, and then we need to use these brackets to indicate that it's a regular expression, and then we put inside the command for the regular expression. And now what we are removing are all small letters A to Z. So I think to get also the big, and you see now we only have the two big letters. I think to get them as well, we need to make one large. Yep, so now it removed all of them, but it also removed numbers, so it wasn't fully successful. So A to Z, that has that. Maybe it's A to Z. Yeah, okay. So apparently small a to large Z removes just every symbol, but large A to small z removes all the letters. So that's pretty cool. So like remove, let's call this remove all letters. And then let's create another one to remove all, remove all numbers. And again, we would go to replace all. We would take our text property. We will pass in the command with this, and we will probably do 129. That's what we want to remove. And we want to replace it with nothing. Perfect. Awesome. So as you can see, the ones for remove all letters and remove all numbers are fairly simple, but you could go just crazy with this, right? You could just tell it to remove remove all A's, right? Remove all A or A's, remove all V's, and so on and so on. So you can stack the individual ones. You can also remove individual symbols, right? Like, so if it's like riddled with some, like if you have like a quotation mark here or so, or you can through regular expression remove everything that comes after this symbol, and so on and so on. There are like lots more examples, and again, the best thing here is to look figure out what it is that you want to do, and then Google for it. I will leave some more resources down in the descriptions, but it's a really powerful thing that you just know that you can write regular expressions and then try to Google something together. And also you can, of course, always ask me in the comments. I will try to Google it for you. So leave a comment below if you have any questions, and we'll try to figure it out together. Now, the last thing that I want to show you for the string manipulations is slice. And slice is another pretty nifty little trick through which you can just extract parts of a string. So if you type slice, you see we get a substring from the whole string, from a start index to the end index. So what it basically means is we, similar like an Excel sheets, we can just tell it, okay, from the first letter until the fifth letter, just get me that part of it. So in this case, let's go to say slice and slice the let's slice the name, and let's go from 0, because the first letter here, if I recall correctly, is always 0, and the first 5 ones, and then done. And as you can see now, it just takes the first 5 symbols from the name. So that alone is not always the most helpful, right? For of course, if you have some sort of strings where you always need to only the beginning or only need the end part, then that works. But what it's far more helpful for is to create really cool progress bars. Now, as you know, it's not really needed anymore to create fancy progress bars, because you can nowadays just go into the number property and add it, and you have the bar and the ring. But so far they still have limited formatting options, and maybe you want to just, for the good old days, learn how to create progress bars that way. And these progress bars use the slice command. And what you would do is you would take slice, and you would slice any sort of long string that you wanted to have as a look. So for example, we can take 1, 2, 3, oops, let's take just 10 of these, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Awesome. And now we slice them according to how much progress we have. So for that, what we would do, we would get, like, if we would start at the beginning, so we would start at 0, and then we would start at the percentage progress. So, and for the percentage progress, we would use, let's quickly do that. Let's quickly remove this and get actually like the, like just a, oops, just a number. Oops, no, not a select. Let's get a number property, number, and let's do a percent number, and let's do, okay, let's say this is, oops, 45%, this is 30%, and this is 80%. Now we can go in here now and say, okay, slice, and slice it from 0 to the whatever percent number we have here. So slice it from here to, and then because we need to turn the 45%, right, that's 0.45, so that wouldn't slice much, so we need to take the number, and we need to again take it times 100, and then we can close everything. And now, as you can see, we get, oops, we should get different lengths here, but from 0 to, oops, that's wrong, sorry, from 0, we need to do it times 10 because we have 10 icons here, right? So we need to slice between 0 and 10. Okay, and now you see, depending on what number we put in, we get like a different amount of symbols here. So if we put 100% here, oops, 200, 100, we get all the 10. If we have only 1%, 10% here, we get only 1, and so on and so on. And you could use then this slice command to build any sort of progress bar that you wanted. Great. So that are the basics for string manipulation. So we nearly made it. Just one last chapter, and that's logic. Logic won't take long because we already looked at a few things along the way because we need them, but it's home to probably one of the most important formulas, and that's the if formula. So let's again just fill this out with a few entries. Let's say, what should we do? Let's get tasks this time. So bring out the trash, film, YouTube, video, and what else? Send parcel. Great. And now for a second, let's get a select property here, and we add options here, and we say to do, and we say done, and we say waiting on. Great. And now we can say, okay, we need to bring out the trash. We are waiting for something for the YouTube video because maybe our editor is doing some work, and then we say send parcel. That's done. Now, with formulas, we can now easily see where something is. Of course, we can filter for something like here, but maybe we want to have something else on top of that. So let's go to the formulas, and let's start with the simplest one, the simplest version of an if statement, the all-time classic. And yeah, look at how it's built. So an if statement is probably one of the formulas that you, even though it comes here now towards the end, you will probably use quite a lot throughout the workspace because it's so flexible. So with an if operator, what you do is you type in the things that you want to check, and then you see whether, oops, that's the case. So you need to first pass in something that's true or false. Let's go back to the formula. If, that's what they say here by boolean. So first you need to have anything that's either true or false, and then you need to have a value that is shown if it's true, and then a value that is shown if it's false. So you already know how to get some to see whether something is true or false, right? Like every time we check something or we ask Notion a question where the answer is yes or no, it will return a checkbox or a boolean. Just like to quickly revisit this, if we say, okay, is the select property, does that equal to done? And we see we get one checkbox. Quick remark here, this is also case sensitive, so if it would be done, none of this would be here. Okay, so we know like all these sorts of information, all sort of these formulas that ask either equal or not equal, or the larger or bigger operators, all of them will return some sort of true or false answer. So we can use that to build our if statement. So let's just write it around it. If, open the brackets, and now we need to say what should it return if it's true. So we can just say, we can give us an emoji, right? So we can say, okay, please celebrate if it's done, and if it's not done, we just do like a motivational message, keep going. Perfect. And now as you can see, we get either the emoji or that depending on what the status is. To do, now it's done, now we can celebrate. So that's, again, pretty nice. We can, of course, add to that through something like our formulas that we had before, right? If we have our due date, so let's say we have a due date for this task, due date, and we say, okay, we should have brought out the trash yesterday, we should have filmed this yesterday, but parcel, for that we have a bit more time. And now we can, we already learned in the date manipulation how to check whether this is overdue or not. So we can now, in addition to it being overdue, we can add maybe a red flag to it to really make it pop. So we can say overdue flag. And for that, we go now in and say again, okay, check please whether now is bigger than our due date, And of course, I should now add the one date to it to make sure it displays properly, but we're going to skip it for this formula. So now we have again our true or false statement. So we can again build our if statement around it. So we can say if this is the case, if this is actually overdue, then please give me a red flag. Otherwise, give me nothing, probably, right? Awesome. So now we have our red flags, and we could again, if we were to say, okay, somewhere else in my workspace, I want to have this maybe maybe I want to have it as a board view, or I take again a gallery view. I have no card preview, and I want to just see at a glance, okay, property, give me the overdue flag. So I now see at a glance, okay, which tasks are overdue because they have this overdue flag. Great. So that's how you can use the if formula to just put things in. You could also use the if formula to return true or false. That would be kind of unnecessary, but possible. So if you instead of, you could of course type like true or false in here, but that will return true or false as strings, not as the boolean. But you can also say true without any quotation marks and false without any quotation marks. And now it returns again the checkboxes. Again, this is kind of unnecessary because you could just remove the if statement and just show this and would do the same. But maybe there's a situation where you want to fill true or false. Cool. Moving on, what other logic operators do we have? You already know now the AND operator to stack things on top of each other, right? So for two conditions. So we could say maybe this is select, and maybe this is like we have another one that is assigned to me. So let's do assign this one to myself and this one. And maybe we want to know, okay, which tasks are overdue and my job. So let's get another formula and build an AND property, an AND formula. So we do AND. The first thing that we want to be the case is we want to make sure that overdue flag, is true, right? If this is checked, it's overdue. And we want to make sure that it is assigned to me. So, and person equals, and then my name. Let me see, that should be, Matthias Frank, yeah, okay. So now we get a check for everything, overdue and my job. Now we get a checkbox for everything that is overdue and my job. And you can, of course, use this to add additional statements. You can't use them directly in here, right? The AND one only supports 2. So if I try to pass in another argument there now, let's say like, and I want, for whatever reason, it is supposed to be, that's a good one. And it's supposed to be not done, because if it's done, then it's no longer my job, right? So I would say, and the select property is not done. Now you see too many arguments in the function. So it doesn't work like that. But what you can do instead is you can simply nest these statements. So what you do for this is you just have the first one, and then you add another one, say AND. So you have the first statement, and then you have another AND statement. And for this one, you can then say, okay, give me this one. And now it should be Do we still have too many arguments in there? I don't think so. So we have the first one, and we have this one, and we have the second one, Matthias Frank, and this. This should actually be right. Let's build it again from the beginning. Sometimes it can be a bit confusing with the editor here. So the first thing that we wanted to check is the person. Is that me? Cool. And then we want to see whether we have another AND argument. And in this one, we want to check whether the overdue is true. And we want to see whether the select one is not done. Yeah, now it works. Perfect. So now we only get it checked here because the other one was done. But if we put this also to done, you see it disappears. So you can simply nest an infinite amount of AND statements. You only need to, because then it counts always as 2 arguments, right? The first argument for this AND statement is this one, and the second argument are these two things together. And the same is true for if statements and pretty much all of the statements that I'm just about to show you. So for an if statement, again, you only can have two conditions, right? You can have only one thing, right? So you can only say, if this is true, then give me this, otherwise give me this. But maybe you want to have like 5 options. So you say, if A, then this. So let's just do this actually. So let's have different ones here. We have waiting on and we have to do. And now let's say we want to build a nested if statement. And we want to say, okay, if it is waiting on, if the status is waiting on, then please give me a time emoji maybe to symbolize that we are waiting. Otherwise, and now the next if statement, if the select equals to do, then give me, what is a to-do one? We could use the muscle one for this one. And now we could, of course, use a third if statement, but because it ends here, we can just like say, okay, if none of these two things are true, and it's always the third, the last option, then we can just put it in directly. If none of this is the case, then give me the green one. And then just close all the brackets. Okay, now we see that this was spelled wrong because we got here a green one for the first one, but this should actually be not green, it should be the clock, but it's because here this is small and here it's capitalized, so we need to change that. Boom, and now it works properly. So this is how you can nest if statements, and statements, and all of them together. The next logic operator to quickly look at would be for alternatives, would be the OR operator. OR is the opposite of and returns true if both statements are true, or will return true if either statement is true. So if we say, okay, please flag something if it is either overdue or my job, we would say it should be either the person should be me, or overdue flag should be true. And now, whenever it is either assigned to me or overdue, it will be checked. And as you can see, all of them are checked. And again, with alternatives, you can, of course, stack them or nest them as well. Just 2 more quick things, not much, but we have then also not. Not simply turn something to the opposite. So if something is true, it will turn into false, and the other way around. So we can just say for the overdue flag, right? Oops. Don't know why it always gives me 2 here. This just inverses it. So we have now not overdue question mark and 1 check. And of course, if this would change here as well. So we have not the not operator, and then the last operator, and then we're done, is the empty operator. Again, quite useful to check something. So with that, we can simply see whether something is not existent. So we can go to maybe the person, right? Which person has not been assigned, and we see it's this one. And we can, of course, combine them, right? We could see, okay, who's not empty, and then see, okay, who is assigned to something. And with that, you learned everything you ever need to know about Notion's formulas. If you still have any questions, just drop a comment below and I'll be sure to answer it. You can find the other videos for this ultimate Notion tutorial on YouTube, plus a bunch of additional resources in the description below. And last but not least, subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so that you never miss one of these awesome ways to learn more about Notion. See you in the next one.